welcome to the Paranormal AF podcast. I'm your host, Rin, and today we are having a storytime episode. I will be doing these from time to time in between the episodes that require me to do research when I do the deep dives into different stories or haunted places for you. Today's story is a reportedly true tale of the paranormal that I found on Reddit, and how I'll be doing these episodes is I will tell you the story that I found, and then I will give you my thoughts on the story. Please understand that I have no way to prove or disprove any of the OP stories that I will be telling here on the channel. The purpose of these episodes will be entertainment and discussion. It is entirely up to you if you choose to believe the OP story or not. When I do these episodes, again, I cannot say if these are true or not. They are not my stories. So take them how you choose to take them. I chose today's story because I've had something similar happen to me in the past, actually in like a couple of different ways. And because of that, the story resonated with me and I have a few thoughts on it. Part of me is like, this story isn't really scary, but then on the other hand, part of me thinks this story is absolutely terrifying, but you'll understand when we get into the story. Just in the spirit of transparency, I want to let you know that I am editing the OP's original post just a little bit because there's some content that was in the original post that could be triggering for some, and that's not what this channel or discussion is about. So I'm going to give you the very big, broad brushstrokes there so you get what the OP is talking about. Like, we'll allude to it. But we're going to skip over the details for that part of the story. We're not going there because that's not what this podcast is about. So, without any further ado, the OP writes, I seem to have an ongoing problem hearing knocking on my door in the middle of the night. Half the time I chalk it up to weird dreams, as I am usually half asleep when I hear something, and usually have a precursor of strange dreams beforehand. Tonight was a little different, though. Sure, I was half asleep when I heard my husband's keys jingle and the lock on the front door click. About that time, the baby started fussing, so I passed her a pacifier. Awake enough now, I could hear my husband walking around the living room. I head to the restroom, do what I gotta do, still hearing his keys jingle as he walks. Then silence. I go to the living room. No husband. Door locked. No car in the drive. Front porch light off. I even texted him to see if he was still at work. He works 2 counties over, and he assured me he was still at work. To add, as far as I know, nobody has ever died in our home. It's from the 70s. However, the previous owners were up to no good. Mostly drug involvement, and I have suspicions that their 7-year-old daughter may have been abused in this house, as I found some suspicious things in what was her room, as well as an exterior lock on her door and a window that opened only from the outside. Probably not relevant, but bad acts can bring bad energy. We've had the house cleansed. I can't say for sure with what, but it wasn't sage. It was some bag of herbs now stapled to my son's wall, a few stones, incense, and some kind of fragrant wood was burned. But it hasn't stopped the dreams, the knocking, and now it sounds like whatever wanted in has finally made it inside. Let me know your thoughts and maybe some suggestions. So this story both is and isn't super creepy and scary, like I said. Nothing jumps out at us, but if you've ever lived out in a rural area, as the OP does, and had anything like this happen, you know that it is absolutely bone-chilling, terrifying when you're actually living it. And part of what makes these types of stories so scary, at least in my opinion, is that there's just as much of a possibility that this is a living person messing with this woman as it is possible that this is paranormal. So first things first, I'd want to eliminate the possibility it's a living flesh and blood person. OP says that the previous owners were involved in drugs, so they may not have given the home up willingly, or maybe they still have some stuff stashed in it that they are trying to get back in and retrieve. The first home I ever rented was a garage that had been converted into a tiny home, with my landlord living in the original house directly next door to me. We started noticing things out of place, and some money and pieces of jewelry went missing. We thought we were just going crazy at first, and we thought we were misplacing things around the house. But the stuff that went missing, it never turned back up. We never found the money that went missing. We never found the couple of necklaces I had that went missing. You would think, like, if you just misplaced it, you'd eventually find it. It was a husband and wife that we rented from, and one day the husband, who I knew had an issue with drugs, said something, and I don't even remember what it was he said to me, but a light switch flipped. I now suspected at that point that he was letting himself into our house when we weren't home. So I bought a webcam and set it up for motion activation in our living room whenever we left the house. And there was also a crawl space under the back of the house for access to the plumbing. And it was really small, like very claustrophobic, just enough room to crawl down in there and like mess with the plumbing. And I could tell that somebody had been going in and out of there. There were like some shingles that went across the hatch for entrance. And I found those moved, and I found some other stuff disturbed that I was like, somebody has been back here. I did catch him on camera in our house without permission when we weren't home. I had put out a decoy, of course, and he took the decoy. So we then knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, we were not misplacing things. We were not losing things. The landlord was coming in and messing with stuff when we were not there, and even taking stuff, stealing from us when we weren't there. The reason that I'm mentioning any of this, because you may be wondering how it relates to what OP is dealing with, is because our landlord's house eventually got raided by the drug task force, and our landlord was arrested and convicted for manufacturing drugs. And as they did the search of his home, we could see from the stuff they were bringing out that he was actually hiding stuff in the walls of his own house. He had been renovating a part of the house, and he was using that to hide things. But the police were on to him, and that was some of the stuff they took out of the house. I highly suspect that he was hiding stuff in the crawl space under our house as well, but they didn't search that when they searched the main house, and we did not stick around long enough to find out if that was the case. My husband and I discussed it. We were both like, you know what? We knew that there was evidence that he had been under our house. We're like, we're not even going to go look, because if the police are still watching the houses, and that we're not going to go look. We're not going to get involved. This was back in 2010 when it was easier to find housing. So I found us a new place to live in within about 3 days of the landlord getting arrested and the search being conducted on their house. And we were 100% moved out within a week of him getting busted for manufacturing drugs. So, you know, when somebody is doing something illegal like that in the house, they do tend to have hidey places throughout the house where they stash stuff. And so it is possible, if the OP is correct about the previous owners, it's possible that, you know, all of this basically to say, if the original owners were trafficking in or manufacturing drugs in the house, there may be things still in that house, in their hidey holes, that they're actually coming back for. And I don't know about you, but for me, that's the scarier option here. In her story, she says she heard the front door unlock, But when she went to inspect the situation, she found the front door to be locked. It could be that it was the old owner. If the locks weren't changed when OP and her family moved in, he could still have a key and let himself in. If what he was looking for was in the living room, he could have grabbed it and locked the front door on his way out before the OP made it up out of bed to the bathroom and then into the living room. So there is a potential mundane explanation here. The knocking the OP had heard before may have been an attempt to scare her out of the house so that they could enter without her there. But when that didn't work, they may have just let themselves in if they still had a key. And I find it important to note that she didn't hear knocking on this particular night. She said that she heard the knocking during the nights before this, because it was multiple times that she heard the knocking. But she doesn't report hearing the knocking this night. It sounded like someone with keys to the home just let themselves in. But honestly, I find the thought of this story having a mundane explanation far, far, far more scary than a paranormal explanation. I highly recommend that the OP install some cameras outside their home, if at all possible. And honestly, this could be a help both if this is a person messing with her or if it's something paranormal. As for the paranormal side of things, there are a lot of possibilities as to what this could be. The OP says that they do live out in the countryside, but doesn't say what country they live in. I'm guessing the US or Canada, but those are guesses on my part. And she doesn't give us any clues as to what region of one of those countries she's in. But let's talk about a few things. If you live in a rural area and you hear noises coming from the woods at night, oh, no, you didn't. Do not look for, acknowledge, or try to interact in any way with noises you hear coming from the woods at night. Some wooded areas are more notorious than others for having things going bump in the night, but your best bet is to stay inside your home and ignore it. Now, the OP's story, it doesn't seem like she's hearing noises coming from the woods, even though she does say she's out in a rural area. She specifically states that she hears someone knocking on her door. And again, she's not hearing knocking all over the place. She only reports hearing knocking on her door. Which again, this could be a real person. We don't know if the OP is prone to odd dreams or if they've only been happening in connection with the knocking or since they've moved into this home. We also have to ask, is the knocking a part of her dreams or is there actually a knocking sound? Because she talks about maybe it's the dreams, but she doesn't state whether or not anyone else has heard the knocking. My second recommendation in this case, with situations like this, since the OP feels the dreams may be significant, is for the OP to start a dream journal. That way the dreams can be studied in case there are messages from her subconscious or messages from guides or ancestors, or, just by keeping a dream journal, it improves your dream recall, and she may be able to determine if the dreams are occurring while, she might be able to determine, is the knocking in the dream and the dream is waking her up and then she's thinking she heard the knocking at the door, or if the knocking is actually a sound, in the 3D world that is actually waking her up. So by doing a dream journal, she may be able to figure out whether or not the knocking is solely in her dreams or if there's actual knocking going on. The OP is right that even if no one died in the home, if there was abuse going on in the home when the previous owners lived there, that could have left an energetic impression on the home. But in my experience, and this is just my experience, that type of energy would manifest very differently than what the OP is describing. So I don't think that that is the case here. Something that we should probably rule out just to be on the safe side. But from what she describes, I don't think that's the case. I also don't think that an imprint is likely either. if the OP is accurate in that no one has passed away in the home. But she says the previous owners have a 7-year-old daughter, but the home is from the 70s. So if we do the math, if they currently have a 7-year-old daughter, then the previous owners are likely younger than I am, which means they were not the first owners of the home if it's from the 70s. It could be possible that someone lived in and passed away in the home prior to the previous owners that the OP knows of. And in that case, an imprint could be possible, but, and that's a big but, I still don't think that's the case. If it was an imprint of someone coming home to that house just replaying, the knocking leading up to the incident where she heard something entering the house doesn't really make sense. If this was an energetic loop on replay of someone just coming home to their house, it wouldn't have begun as a knocking on the door. That wouldn't make sense. If this is a energetic loop that's just replaying, then the person would have, well, I shouldn't say the person, the imprint of what that person's normal routine was wouldn't have started with a knocking on the door. The imprint would have always had the key. There always would have been the opening of the lock and the walking through the living room if that portion was an imprint. If this is something paranormal, I'd lean towards at least one intelligent entity. Just spitballing things there. Now, I know with the knocking, it's tempting for some people to think that the OP could or should try to see if the entity can communicate with them through the knocking to find out who it is and what it wants, if it happens to be an intelligent entity. But I cannot say how much I strongly caution against this. Especially in this particular case. If this is an entity from the woods, let's say, where we traditionally hear about those stories and what is lurking in the woods at night and going bump in the woods at night, we don't want to try to communicate with those entities in any way. Nothing beneficial can come from attempting that, if that's what this is. I also have another reason why I don't recommend trying to communicate with whatever it is, but we'll get to that. But I highly discourage any attempts to directly communicate with whatever this is if it is paranormal. The other thing that really concerns me here is that she says she's had someone in to cleanse the house, but she's seen zero improvement. And I think this is something we need to look at hard. First explanation is that she could have asked someone to do the cleansing that didn't really know what they were doing. But honestly, a basic spiritual cleanse is simple enough for any lay person to perform. But it's really important for folks to understand this when it comes to cleansing and the paranormal. Not all things that go bump in the night can be banished. In fact, spiritual cleansing is something you need to perform on a regular basis to keep your average stubborn bumps in the night at bay. Because some things you can't get rid of, you can just hold them outside of your castle walls, if you will. This means it's possible that if this person came in and this is something paranormal, it's something that can't be completely banished. Still, I'd expect a period of calm after the cleansing, or sometimes you'll get an uptick in activity after a cleansing. But the fact that the OP indicates zero difference after the cleansing, again, brings me back to the idea of this being a flesh and blood person. She says she doesn't know what was used in the cleansing, but from her description, it's likely that one of the things used was Palo Santo, and that's a pretty potent method in my experience when used properly. Knowing this was one of the things used, but she didn't see any change in activity, at least according to her post, again, this leans me very heavily in the direction that this may not be something paranormal. But if it is paranormal, And the person who did the cleansing had a relatively good idea of what they were doing, and it didn't have an effect on the activity. This definitely tells me that if this is paranormal, it's not something you want to make any attempts to communicate with, because you will be in over your head quicker than you know what. I can't say the word because YouTube doesn't like it when I swear. I don't have a really good place to weave these couple of thoughts I have in, but so we're just gonna, it's random thoughts that we're just gonna throw in here. It's never a good idea to have anything that says welcome near your entrance. No sign on your door, no welcome mat, no welcome sign on your porch, no decorative welcome flag leading up to or around your entrance, any of that. You certainly don't have to agree with me on this idea, because I know there are people that don't abide by this. But there are a lot of folks who believe certain entities must be invited into your home or space, or that at the very least it makes it easier for them to enter your space if they are invited, and these things count as invitations. If you have any of these things, and if the OP has any of these things, I would recommend getting rid of them, doing something to rescind the invitation that they created, cleanse your space and entrance, and put up protective wards. In fact, I'd recommend that the OP have the home cleansed again and put up wards if that is part of their practice and beliefs. Another thing that you'll see those who live in certain regions infamous for things that go bump in the night in the woods, or that you'll also see some pagans do, is to put a broom propped up by the inside of your door with the bristles up, or sometimes the broom will be hung over the door to keep unwanted things from entering. One of the things that confuses me about this post, though, is that she says the bag of herbs and crystals is on the wall in her son's room. But she doesn't relate any activity in that room, so why is that bag in that room? The knocking, she said, was on her front door, and when she thought she heard her husband come home, that activity was limited to the front door and the living room. So it is possible that maybe there's some more going on that she didn't relay, that she left out. But given the information that we do have from the OP, at the end of the day, I'm more inclined to lean towards this being a person, and I really would like an answer as to why that bag was left in the son's room. It could be because the son's room was originally the 7-year-old girl's room, and since she found the stuff in there that was sus, maybe the mom, the OP, just feels like there needs to be some protection in that room, is why the bag of herbs is there. I am not sure, because she doesn't go into detail. Again, the very first thing I would recommend that the OP do is to set up cameras around the outside of their home. If it is a person, they'll catch them on camera and have something that they can then take to the authorities. If it is paranormal, they'll be able to see that no one is there, at the door when they hear the knocking on the door, or they may even catch some form of paranormal activity on the cameras. For me, in this case, I'd say the most needed next step and course of action is cameras, because this one is just as likely to be a person who needs to not be there as it is to be something ooey. So that is, I consider that an imperative next step in a case like this. What are your thoughts? Do you think it's the old owner messing with her or trying to get something that they left behind? Do you think it's some other flesh and blood person who's realized she's a woman alone at night in a rural area and so is taking advantage of that? Do you think that it's paranormal? And if you do think that it's paranormal, what do you think it is? What's your take on it? I will be doing more story times, and I'm going to try to do some ones that are traditionally more scary as I come across some, just because this one, the scariest part of it to me is that it could be a real life person more so than what's going on. But then again, I also have a thick skin when it comes to the paranormal, so what I find scary and what other people find scary can be a little different. But like I said, I will be doing more story time. So if you've got a true tale of the paranormal that you'd like me to consider for an episode, use my email in the description box to send me your story for consideration, because I would love to start doing some listener stories. I think that would be really fun. So, shoot me a message if you have one. And I hope that you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give the video a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And until I see you again, stay spooky.